Peter Arshinov Archive. The Makhnovists on the National and Jewish Questions. Written, 1919. Source, text from revoltlib.com. Transcription/markup, Andy Karloff. Online source, revoltlib.com, 2021. Composed of the poorest peasants, who were united by the fact that they all worked with their own hands, the Makhnovist movement was founded on the deep feeling of fraternity which characterizes only the most oppressed. During its entire history it did not for an instant appeal to national sentiments. The whole struggle of the Makhnovists against the Bolsheviks was conducted solely in the name of the rights and interests of the workers. Denikin's troops, the Austro-Germans, Petliura, the French troops in Berdyansk-Rugel, were all treated by the Makhnovists as enemies of the workers. Each one of these invasions represented for them essentially a threat to the workers, and the Makhnovists had no interest in the national flag under which they marched. In the declaration published by the Revolutionary Military Council of the Army in October, 1919, in the section dealing with the national question, the Makhnovists stated, "When speaking of Ukrainian independence, we do not mean national independence in Petliura's sense but the social independence of workers and peasants. We declare that Ukrainian, and all other, working people have the right to self-determination not as an independent nation but as independent workers." On the question of the language to be taught in schools, the Makhnovists wrote the following. The cultural educational section of the Makhnovist army constantly receives questions from school teachers asking about the language in which instruction should be given in the schools, now that Denikin's troops have been expelled. The revolutionary insurgents, holding to the principles of true socialism, cannot in any field or by any measure do violence to the natural desires and needs of the Ukrainian people. This is why the question of the language to be taught in the schools cannot be solved by our army, but can only be decided by the people themselves, by parents, teachers and students. It goes without saying that all the orders of Denikin's so-called Special Bureau as well as General Maimovsky's Order No. 22, which forbids the use of the mother tongue in the schools, are null and void, having been forcibly imposed on the schools. In the interest of the greatest intellectual development of the people, the language of instruction should be that toward which the local population naturally tends, and this is why the population, the students, the teachers, and the parents, and not authorities or the army, should freely and independently resolve this question. Signed. Cultural Educational Section of the Makhnovist Insurgent Army. Putke Svobod No. 10, October 18, 1919. Thus we see that national prejudices had no place in the Makhnovshchina. There was also no place in the movement for religious prejudices. As a revolutionary movement of the poorest classes of the city and the country, the Makhnovshchina was a principled adversary of all religion and of every god. Among modern social movements, the Makhnovshchina was one of the few in which an individual had absolutely no interest in his own or his neighbor's religion or nationality, in which he respected only the labor and the freedom of the worker. This did not keep the movement's opponents from seeking to discredit it in this field. In the Russian press as well as abroad, the Makhnovshchina was often pictured as a very restricted guerrilla movement, foreign to ideas of brotherhood and international solidarity, and even tainted with anti-Semitism. Nothing could be more criminal than such slanders. In order to shed light on this question, EE will cite here certain documented facts which relate to the subject. An important role was played in the Makhnovist army by revolutionaries of Jewish origin, many of whom had been sentenced to forced labor for participation in the 1905 revolution, or else had been obliged to emigrate to Western Europe or America. Among others, we can mention Kogan, vice president of the central organ of the movement, the Regional Revolutionary Military Council of Gilead Pali. Kogan was a worker who, for reasons of principle, had left his factory well before the revolution of 1917, and had gone to do agricultural work in a poor Jewish agricultural colony. Wounded at the Battle of Peregonovka, near Uman, against the Denikinists, he was seized by them at the hospital at Uman where he was being treated, and, according to witnesses, the Denikinists killed him with sabers. Elzinkovsky, Chsadov, head of the Army's counter-espionage section, and later commander of a special cavalry regiment. A worker who before the 1917 revolution was condemned to 10 years of forced labor for political activities. One of the most active militants of the revolutionary insurrection. Elena Keller, secretary of the Army's Cultural and Educational Section. A worker who took part in the syndicalist movement in America. One of the organizers of the Nabat Confederation. Iosif Emigrant, Gottman, member of the Army's Cultural and Educational Section. A worker who took an active part in the Ukrainian anarchist movement. One of the organizers of the Nabat Confederation, and later a member of its secretariat. Yat. Elai Sukhovalsky, worker, and member of the Army's Cultural and Educational Section. In the Tsarist period he was condemned to forced labor for political activity. One of the organizers of the Nabat Confederation and a member of its secretariat. We could add many more names to the long list of Jewish revolutionaries who took part in different areas of the Makhnovist movement, but we will not do this, because it would endanger their security. At the heart of the revolutionary insurrection, the Jewish working population was among brothers. The Jewish agricultural colonies scattered throughout the districts of Mariupol, Berdyansk, Alexandrovsk, and elsewhere, actively participated in the regional assemblies of peasants, workers, and insurgents. They sent delegates there, and also to the Regional Revolutionary Military Council. Following certain anti-Semitic incidents which occurred in the region in February 1919, Makhno proposed to all the Jewish colonies that they organize their self-defense, and he furnished the necessary guns and ammunition to all these colonies. At the same time Makhno organized a series of meetings in the region where he appealed to the masses to struggle against anti-Semitism. The Jewish working population, in turn, expressed profound solidarity and revolutionary brotherhood toward the revolutionary insurrection. In answer to the call made by the Revolutionary Military Council to furnish voluntary combatants to the Makhnovist insurgent army, the Jewish colonies sent from their midst a large number of volunteers. In the army of the Makhnovist insurgents there was an exclusively Jewish artillery battery which was covered by an infantry detachment, also made up of Jews. This battery, commanded by the Jewish insurgent Schneider, heroically defended Gilead Pali from Denikin's troops in June 1919, and the entire battery perished there, down to the last man and the last shell. In the extremely rapid succession of events after the uprising of 1918-19, there were obviously individuals who were hostile to Jews, but these individuals were not the products of the insurrection, they were products of Russian life. These individuals did not have any importance in the movement as a whole. If people of this type took part in acts directed against Jews, they were quickly and severely punished by the revolutionary insurgents. We described earlier the speed and determination with which the Makhnovists executed Grigorev and his staff, and we mentioned that one of the main reasons for this execution was their participation in pogroms of Jews. We can mention other events of this nature with which we are familiar. On May 12, 1919, several Jewish families, 20 people in all, were killed in the Jewish agricultural colony of Gorkaya, near Alexandrovsk. The Makhnovist staff immediately set up a special commission to investigate this event. This commission discovered that the murders had been committed by 7 peasants of the neighboring village of Uspanovka. These peasants were not part of the insurrectionary army. However, the Makhnovists felt it was impossible to leave this crime unpunished, and they shot the murderers. It was later established that this event and other attempts of this nature had been carried out at the instigation of Denikin's agents, who had managed to infiltrate the region and had sought by these means to prepare an atmosphere favorable for the entry of Denikin's troops into the Ukraine. On May 4 or 5, 1919, Makhno and a few commanders hurriedly left the front and went to Gilead Pali, where they were awaited by the extraordinary plenipotentiary of the Republic, El Kamina, who had arrived from Kharkov with other representatives of the Soviet government. At the Verkhny Tokmak station, Makhno saw a poster with the words, "Death to Jews, Save the Revolution, Long Live Batko Makhno." Who put up that poster? Makhno asked. He learned that the poster had been put up by an insurgent whom Makhno knew personally, a soldier who had taken part in the battle against Denikin's troops, a person who was in general decent. He presented himself immediately and was shot on the spot. Makhno continued the journey to Gilyai-Pali. During the rest of the day and during his negotiations with the plenipotentiary of the Republic, he could not free himself from the influence of this event. He realized that the insurgent had been cruelly dealt with, but he also knew that in conditions of war and in view of Denikin's advance, such posters could represent an enormous danger for the Jewish population and for the entire revolution if one did not oppose them quickly and resolutely. When the insurrectionary army retreated toward Uman in the summer of 1919, there were several cases when insurgents plundered Jewish homes. When the insurrectionary army examined these cases, it was learned that one group of 4 or 5 men was involved in all these incidents, men who had earlier belonged to Grigorev's detachments and who had been incorporated into the Makhnovist army after Grigorev was shot. This group was disarmed and discharged immediately. Following this, all the combatants who had served under Grigorev were discharged from the Makhnovist army as an unreliable element whose re-education was not possible in view of the unfavorable conditions and the lack of time. Thus we see how the Makhnovists viewed anti-Semitism. Outbursts of anti-Semitism in various parts of the Ukraine had no relation to the Makhnovshchina. Wherever the Jewish population was in contact with the Makhnovists, it found in them its best protectors against anti-Semitic incidents. The Jewish population of Gilyai-Pali, Alexandrovsk, Berdyansk, Mariupol, as well as all the Jewish agricultural colonies scattered throughout the Donetsk region, can themselves corroborate the fact that they always found the Makhnovists to be true revolutionary friends, and that due to the severe and decisive measures of the Makhnovists, the anti-Semitic leanings of the counter-revolutionary forces in this region were promptly squashed. Anti-Semitism exists in Russia as well as in many other countries. In Russia, and to some extent in the Ukraine, it is not a result of the revolutionary epoch or of the insurrectionary movement, but is on the contrary a vestige of the past. The Makhnovists always fought it resolutely in words as well as deeds. During the entire period of the movement, they issued numerous publications calling on the masses to struggle against this evil. It can firmly be stated that in the struggle against anti-Semitism in the Ukraine and beyond its borders, their accomplishment was enormous. We have at hand an appeal published by Makhnovists together with anarchists referring to an anti-Semitic incident which took place in the spring of 1919, an incident which was undoubtedly linked to the beginning of Denikin's general offensive against the revolution. Here is an abridged version of the text. Workers, peasants, and insurgents. For the oppressed. Against the oppressors, always. During the painful days of reaction, when the situation of the Ukrainian peasants was especially difficult and seemed hopeless, you were the first to rise as fearless and unconquerable fighters for the great cause of the liberation of the working masses. This was the most beautiful and joyful moment in the history of our revolution. You marched against the enemy with weapons in your hands as conscious revolutionaries, guided by the great idea of freedom and equality. But harmful and criminal elements succeeded in insinuating themselves into your ranks. And the revolutionary songs of brotherhood and of the approaching liberation of the workers, began to be disrupted by the harrowing cries of poor Jews who were being tormented to death. On the clear and splendid foundation of the revolution appeared indelible dark blots caused by the parched blood of poor Jewish martyrs who now, as before, continue to be innocent victims of the criminal reaction, of the class struggle. Shameful acts are being carried out. Anti-Semitic pogroms are taking place. Peasants, workers, and insurgents. You know that the workers of all nationalities, Russians, Jews, Poles, Germans, Armenians, etc., are equally imprisoned in the abyss of poverty. You know that thousands of Jewish girls, daughters of the people, are sold and dishonored by capital, the same as women of other nationalities. You know how many honest and valiant revolutionary Jewish fighters have given their lives for freedom in Russia during our whole liberation movement. The revolution and the honor of workers obliges all of us to declare as loudly as possible that we make war on the same enemies, on capital and authority, which oppress all workers equally, whether they be Russian, Polish, Jewish, etc. We must proclaim everywhere that our enemies are exploiters and oppressors of various nationalities, the Russian manufacturer, the German iron magnate, the Jewish banker, the Polish aristocrat. The bourgeoisie of all countries and all nationalities is united in a bitter struggle against the revolution, against the laboring masses of the whole world and of all nationalities. Peasants, workers, and insurgents. At this moment when the international enemy, the bourgeoisie of all countries, hurries to the Russian Revolution to create nationalist hatred among the mass of workers in order to distort the revolution and to shake the very foundation of our class struggle, the solidarity and unity of all workers, you must move against conscious and unconscious counter-revolutionaries who endanger the emancipation of the working people from capital and authority. Your revolutionary duty is to stifle all nationalist persecution by dealing ruthlessly with all instigators of anti-Semitic pogroms. The path toward the emancipation of the workers can be reached by the union of all the workers of the world. Long live the Workers' International! Long live the free and stateless anarchist commune! Signed. Executive Committee of the Revolutionary Military Council of the Gilia-Ipali Region. Nabat Anarchist Group in Gilia-Ipali. Commander of the Makhnovist Insurrectionary Army, Batko Makhno. Chief of Staff of the Makhnovist Insurrectionary Army, B. Veritelnikov. Village of Gilia-Ipali, May 1919. Appendix to Chapter 10. Order Number 1. This order was published at the time of the unification and organization of all the insurrectionary forces into a single army, when, after the forced retreat from the region of Gilia-Ipali, the detachments who had served under Grigorev and the Red Army troops who had come from Novi Bug to join the Makhnovists were incorporated into the insurrectionary army in the region of Elizavetgrad Pomeshnaya. From the commander of the Ukrainian Revolutionary Insurrectionary Army, Batko Makhno. To all the commanders of the infantry, corps, brigades, regiments, battalions, companies, platoons, and sections, cavalry, brigades, regiments, squadrons, and platoons, artillery, divisions, batteries. To all heads of staffs, garrisons. To all revolutionary insurgents without exception. 1. The goal of our revolutionary army, and of every insurgent participating in it, is an honorable struggle for the full liberation of the Ukrainian workers from all oppression. This is why every insurgent should constantly keep in mind that there is no place among us for those who, under the cover of the revolutionary insurrection, seek to satisfy their desires for personal profit, violence, and plunder at the expense of the peaceful Jewish population. 2. Every revolutionary insurgent should remember that his personal enemies as well as the enemies of all the people are the rich bourgeoisie, regardless of whether they be Russian, or Jewish, or Ukrainian. The enemies of the working people are also those who protect the unjust bourgeois regime, i.e., the Soviet commissars, the members of repressive expeditionary corps, the extraordinary commissions which go through the cities and villages torturing the working people who refuse to submit to their arbitrary dictatorship. Every insurgent should arrest and send to the army staff all representatives of such expeditionary corps, extraordinary commissions and other institutions which oppress and subjugate the people. If they resist, they should be shot on the spot. As for any violence done to peaceful workers of whatever nationality, such acts are unworthy of any revolutionary insurgent, and the perpetrator of such acts will be punished by death. 3. All acts of individual requisition or confiscation as well as any exchange of horses or vehicles with the peasants without written authorization from the supply commander will be severely punished. Every insurgent should realize that requisitions of this type would only attract to the ranks of the insurrectionary army hooligans of the worst type, individuals thirsting for wealth and eager to carry out shameful acts which distort our liberatory revolutionary movement under the very cover of the revolutionary insurrection. I appeal to all insurgent militants to take it upon themselves to protect the honor of our truly revolutionary insurrectionary army by opposing every unjust act either among ourselves or among the working people whom we are defending. i.e. to struggle against injustice in the insurgents' own environment and in the insurgents' relations to the environment of the working people, PA. We cannot practice injustice among ourselves. We cannot mistreat even one son or daughter of the working people for whom we are fighting. And every insurgent who takes part in such an act covers himself with shame and brings upon himself the punishment of the Popular Revolutionary Army. For in the interests of the revolution and of a just struggle for our ideals, it is necessary to maintain the most rigorous fraternal discipline in our ranks. The greatest respect and obedience in military matters toward your chosen commanders are absolutely indispensable. This is required by the importance of the cause which has fallen to us to defend, which we will honorably carry to its conclusion, but which we will lose if we do not maintain discipline among ourselves. This is why I require the commanders and the insurgents to maintain strict discipline among themselves and in all their actions. 5. Drunkenness is to be considered a crime. It is a still greater crime for a revolutionary insurgent to show himself drunk in the street. 6. Every insurgent traveling from one village to another should be ready for combat. The relations with the peaceful population in the villages and on the roads should be above all amicable and comradely. Remember, comrade commanders and insurgents, that we are the sons of the great working people, that all the workers are our brothers and our sisters. The cause for which we fight is a great one, which demands that we be untiring, generous, full of brotherly love and revolutionary honor. That is why I call on all revolutionary insurgents to be real friends of the people and true sons of the revolution. This is the source of our power and the guarantee of our victory. Signed, Commander of the Ukrainian Revolutionary Insurrectionary Army, Batko Makhno. Hamlet of Dobrovolkovka. Government of Kherson. August 5, 1919. Reply to Anarchism's Confusionists. Written, 1927. Source, text from revoltlib.com. Transcription/markup, Andy Karloff. Online source, revoltlib.com, 2021. Group of Russian anarchists abroad. Also known as the Dialo-Truda Group. With a foreword by Pyotr Arshinov. Foreword, the crux of the matter. The debates provoked by the organizational platform have thus far focused chiefly upon its various arguments or indeed the draft organization proposed by it. Most of its critics, as well as several of its supporters, have at no time been clear-sighted in their appreciation of the matter of the platform's premises. They have never tried to discover what were factors that prompted its appearance, the point of departure adopted by its authors. And yet these are matters of the greatest importance to those who seek to understand the spirit and importance of the platform. The recently published reply to the platform from Volin and a few other anarchists, purporting to be a wholesale rebuttal of the platform, has, for all the effort invested in the undertaking, for all its claims to be reading between the lines, failed to rise above the level of banal diatribe against arguments that are considered in isolation, and it has shown itself powerless to strike at the very heart of the matter. Given that this reply displays utter incomprehension of the theses of the platform, misrepresenting them and using sophistry to counter them, the group of Russian anarchists abroad, having scrutinized this would-be rebuttal, has once again identified a series of points that are being queried. At the same time, the group has registered the political and theoretical inadequacies of the reply. The commentary below is given over to an examination of their reply. It is not intended either as a compliment nor as an addendum to the platform, it is merely designed to clarify a few of its theses. Nevertheless, let us avail of this opportunity to point out a few things for consideration by comrades who may take an interest in the platform for organization of anarchism. We believe that in so doing we will be helping to make its meaning and its spirit better understood. We have fallen into the habit of ascribing the anarchist movement's failure in Russia in 1917 to 1919 to the Bolshevik Party's statist repression, which is a serious error. Bolshevik repression hampered the anarchist movement's spread during the revolution, but it was only one obstacle. Rather, it was the anarchist movement's own internal ineffectuality which was one of the chief causes of that failure, an ineffectuality emanating from the vagueness and indecisiveness that characterized its main policy statements on organization and tactics. Anarchism had no firm, hard and fast opinion regarding the main problems facing the social revolution, an opinion needed to satisfy the masses who were carrying out the revolution. Anarchists were calling for a seizure of the factories, but had no well-defined homogeneous notion of the new production and its structures. Anarchists championed the communist device from each according to abilities, to each according to needs, but they never bothered to apply this precept to the real world. In this way, they allowed suspect elements to turn this grand principle into a caricature of anarchism. We might just remember how many swindlers seized upon this principle as a means of grabbing collective assets during the revolution for their own personal advantage. Anarchists talked a lot about the revolutionary activity of the workers themselves, but they were unable to direct the masses, even roughly, towards the forms that such activity might assume. They proved unable to regulate reciprocal relations between the masses and their ideological center. They incited the masses to shrug off the yoke of authority, but they did not indicate how the gains of revolution might be consolidated and defended. They had no clear-cut opinion and specific action policies with regard to lots of other problems. Which is what alienated them from the activities of the masses and condemned them to social and historical impotence. That is where we have to look for the prime cause of their failure in the Russian Revolution. We Russian anarchists who lived through the ordeal of revolution in 1905 and 1917 have not the slightest lingering doubt of that. The obviousness of anarchism's internal ineffectuality has impelled us to search around for ways that might afford it success. Upwards of 20 years of experience, revolutionary activity, 20 years of efforts in anarchist ranks, and of effort that met with nothing but failures by anarchism as an organizing movement, all of this has convinced us of the necessity of a new comprehensive anarchist party organization rooted in one homogeneous theory, policy, and tactic. These are the premises of the organizational platform. Should anarchist militants of other countries, with no first-hand experience of the Russian Revolution, but with any knowledge of it, however meager, be willing to examine carefully the climate within the anarchist movement in their own country, they cannot fail to notice that the internal ineffectuality that caused anarchism to fail in the Russian Revolution is equally prevalent in their own ranks and represents a deadly threat to the movement, especially in time of revolution. They will then understand the significance of the step forward that the organizational platform represents for anarchism, from the point of view of ideas as well as that of organization and construction. Pyotr Arshinov. Response to the reply of some Russian anarchists. The reply, of April 1927, from some Russian anarchists to the platform is an attempt to criticize and utterly refute the organizational platform published by the group of Russian anarchists abroad. The reply's authors claim to be in disagreement, not with certain ideas set out in the platform, but rather with the whole thing. It is precisely the platform as such, its underlying principles, its essence, its very mentality that are not, in our estimation, acceptable, they say. They reckon it is not anarchism, but Bolshevism which is set out therein. The ideological essence of the Bolsheviks and the platformists is identical. Unquestionably, they say, the platform's authors look upon these as indispensable, the creation of a directing policy center, the organization of an army and police force at the disposal of that center, which, in essence means, the introduction of a transitional political authority status in character. And the reply is peppered with lots of other similar and similarly stunning assertions. It is our belief that such assertions make it obligatory upon their authors that they adduce adequate evidence before they make them. Indeed, this practice of making unfounded allegations may lead the anarchist to questionable conduct. Every anarchist, in a true sense of the word, ought thus to make a determined stand against this approach. In the course of our exposition, we shall see in what measure the authors of the reply have authenticated their claims, and this may enlighten us as to the meaning and worth of their arguments. Its authors open with the declaration that they are wholly in disagreement with the group regarding several fundamental or important theses in the platform. But in reality, the dissension relates to every one of the platform's theses on organization and principle. To explain their difference of opinion, they go to a lot of bother, resort to lots of sophistry and come up with unlikely arguments of their own. Since they are a priori hostile to the entirety of the platform, but have no explicit view of their own on any of the issues broached therein, this necessarily had to be the case. We can appreciate this if we examine their main objections. But there is more. We shall see too that the authors of the reply, while rebutting certain arguments of the platform, very often wind up reiterating those arguments, claiming them as their own and using them to counter the platform. 1 point. The best retort to their objections is the platform itself, and the reader will find a specific and definite opinion there on all of the issues broached. We shall, in order to clarify the spirit and the current by which they are motivated, by dwelling only upon certain points from the platform which the authors of the reply have sought to rebut. 1. The causes of the anarchist movement's weakness. The platform locates the main cause of the anarchist movement's weakness in the absence of organizing factors and organized relations within the movement, which plunges it into a state of chronic disorganization. At the same time, the platform adds that this disorganization itself nestles in a few shortcomings of an ideological nature. We can see these shortcomings in a whole range of petit bourgeois principles which have nothing to do with anarchism. The disorganization prevailing in our ranks draws succor from ideological confusion. And in order to overcome such practical and ideological confusion, the platform floats the idea of establishing a general organization founded upon a homogeneous program. In this way, the platform lays the foundations for a general organization of anarchists and creates ideological homogeneity. The organization thus collectively created will be strong enough to free anarchism from its ideological contradictions and organizational inadequacies and to pave the way for a mighty anarchist organization banded around homogeneous principles. We see no other way of developing and fortifying anarchism among the masses. The platform has pointed out that the approach of bringing the various strands of anarchism together into one tenderly united family will not restore the health of the anarchist movement, but will instead weaken and befuddle it. The criticisms from the reply utterly repudiate the picture of the causes of the anarchist movement's weaknesses that the platform has outlined. They see the causes located in the vagueness of several ideas basic to our outlook, such as the notion of social revolution, that of violence, that of collective creativity, that of the transitional period, that of organization, and still others. Also, the authors of the reply enumerate other matters on which not all anarchists see eye to eye. If they are to be believed, you would think that anarchists have no common view on any matter, and that we would first have to theorize about everything before going on to tackle the organization issue. We have heard these ideas and promises often by now. And, instead of threatening for the 101st time to come up with a probing theoretical work, would the authors of the reply not be better employed getting on with that task, bringing it to fruition and offering it as a counter to the platform? Our conception of the principles of anarchism is quite different. We are well aware that there is agreement among anarchists on the major issues like the idea of social revolution, that of violence, collective creativity, dictatorship, organization, etc. Those who have thus far remained adversaries of social revolution, of revolutionary violence and of organization, will always be such, and it really would be too naive to begin the history of anarchism all over again just for them. As soon as somebody would come along and tell us that they do not accept the idea of social revolution, someone else would announce that they are against revolutionary violence, and a third would express unhappiness with the very idea of communist anarchism, and a fourth would speak up against the class struggle. Shouting in every instance that anarchism's principles are not precise enough is tantamount in fact to the failure to devise an overall theory. Didn't we have Bakunin, Kropotkin and Malatesta who were precise enough about anarchism's principles? There were anarchist movements in a variety of countries based on those principles. How can we claim that they were not clear enough? True, there are many obscure points in anarchism. But those are of quite another character. The fact is that alongside unquestionably anarchist personnel, the movement contains a number of liberal tendencies and individualist deviations that prevent it from having a stable base. To restore the movement to health, it must be freed of those tendencies and deviations, but this purge is, to a very large extent, prevented by just those individualists, open or disguised, and the authors of the reply are undoubtedly to be numbered among the latter, who are part of the movement. 2. The class struggle in the anarchist system. The platform declares quite plainly that the class struggle between labor and capital was at all times in the history of human societies the chief factor determining the form and structure of those societies, that anarchism emerged and developed on the terrain of that struggle, in the bosom of oppressed, laboring humanity, that anarchism is a social movement of the oppressed masses. The attempt to represent it as a general humanitarian problem amounts to a social and historical falsehood. In the struggle between capital and labor, anarchism fights wholeheartedly and inseparably alongside the latter. The authors of the reply counter that clear and precise message with anarchism is a synthesis of elements, class, humanitarian, individual. That is the view held in common with liberals fearful of relying upon the truths of labor, who are forever dithering ideologically between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat looking for common humanitarian values to use as connections between the contending classes. But we know well that there is no mankind, one and indivisible, that the demands of anarchist communism will be met only through the determination of the working class and that the activity of mankind as a whole, including the bourgeoisie, will not come into that at all. Consequently, the viewpoint peddled by the liberals who do not know how to pick a side in the worldwide social tragedy cannot have anything to do with the class struggle, and thus with anarchism. 3. On the problem of direction of the masses and events from the ideal point of view. The reply rather takes issue more with the idea of an authoritarian leadership of its own devising than with the idea set out in the platform. And, broadly speaking, throughout the reply its authors strive to divine some hidden meaning to the enigmatic platform and go on to paint a picture that might strike terror not just into anarchists but even into certain overly sentimental statists. Thus, the influence wielded in the realm of ideas by the anarchists over the revolutionary trade unions is turned by them into subordination of those unions to the anarchist organization. The method of the common revolutionary military strategy applied in defense of the revolution becomes, in their interpretation, the idea of a centralized state's army. The notion of an executive committee of an anarchist organization becomes, in their representation of it, that of a dictatorial central committee demanding unquestioning obedience. One might think that the authors of the reply are too ignorant to be capable of grasping the essence of all these problems. Not a bit of it. All of the misrepresentations and alterations made by the latter are made to the same end. We shall demonstrate anon to what end our adversaries pretend to be alarmed by the expression direction of the masses and events from the idea's point of view. But are they not then like those odd sorts who, being terrified by the idea of influence, are afraid of influencing themselves? Direction of the masses from the idea's point of view simply means the existence of a guiding idea in their movement. In the world of socialist struggle and socialist demands, such ideas are not numerous. But it is natural that we anarchists wanted the toilers' guiding idea to be the anarchist idea and not that of the social democrats, for example, of those who have only recently betrayed the Viennese workers' revolutionary movement. But, in order that the anarchist idea should become the lodestone of the masses, we have to develop well-organized ideological activity which in turn necessitates an anarchist organization whose members spread very clear and coherent notions among the masses. All of which is so elementary and self-evident that it is embarrassing to have to spell it out again in this day and age to folk who claim to be conversant with anarchism. The authors of the reply are, moreover, well aware of that, since, after having misrepresented our point of view and peddled a mountain of absurdities regarding the general union of anarchists, they close by saying that the anarchists' role in economic organization is to influence the masses morally and in terms of ideas, while that of specifically anarchist organizations would be to help them indeed from this idea's point of view. But is not saying that tantamount to borrowing the positions of the platform after having blackened the name? What is the meaning of influence and assist the masses from the idea point of view? Are anarchists going to render ideological assistance to a mob in the process of mounting a pogrom or of carrying out a lynch law? All assistance afforded to the masses in the realm of ideas must be consonant with the ideology of anarchism, otherwise it will not be anarchist assistance. Ideologically assist simply means, influence from the idea's point of view, direct from the idea's point of view a leadership of ideas. Bakunin, Kropotkin, Reclus, Malatesta, those are men who were, incontestably, ideological directors of the masses. But we aim to see that such direction, exercised occasionally, becomes a permanent factor. That is only going to be possible when there is an organization possessed with a common ideology and whose membership engages in ideologically coordinated activity, without being sidetracked or dispersed as has been the case hitherto. Those are the terms in which the question is posed. And it is in vain that the authors of the reply will dream up sophisms in order to show that direction in the realm of ideas mean authoritarian direction. It is the masses of people that will make the revolution themselves, say our adversaries. Understood. But they ought to know that the revolutionary mass is forever nurturing in its bosom a minority of initiators who precipitate and direct events. And we are entitled to assert that in a true social revolution the supporters of worker anarchism alone will account for that minority. 4. The idea of the transitional period. The platform notes that the social political parties understand the term transitional period to mean a specific stage in the life of a people, the essential features of which period are, a breach with the old order of things and the installation of a new economic and political system, a system which as yet does not represent the complete emancipation of the toilers. Communist anarchism, however, repudiates transitional arrangements of that sort. It advocates social revolution of the toilers that will lay the foundations for their free and egalitarian society. It strikes us that the problem could not be posed any more clearly. But the authors of the reply have contrived to discover the precise opposite in the platform. In their estimation, the platform is, all in all, merely an attempt to peddle this idea, of the transitional period, and to graft it onto anarchism. And here comes the proof. The platform looks forward to certain points when the press, or rather the abuse thereof, of the class hostile to the toilers will have been shut down by struggling labor. And the authors of the reply insist, why, doesn't that amount to a transitional period really? Then again the platform declares the anarchist communist principle from each according to abilities, to each according to needs in no way makes it incumbent upon labor in rebellion to feed everyone, including its avowed enemies who, for counter-revolutionary motives, would refuse to play a part in the production and would dream of nothing other than decapitating the revolution. That principle merely means equality in distribution within the parameters of the egalitarian society. It does not at all apply to those who have placed themselves outside that society for counter-revolutionary purposes. Furthermore, that principle means that every member of laboring society who profits from its services should serve it in accordance with their strengths and capabilities and not at all in accordance with their whims or indeed not at all. The authors of the reply again raise the hue and cry, what about that, is that not a transitional period? They proclaim the application of the principle of equal enjoyment of all available and freshly manufactured products, regardless of their quantity, by all the members of the collectivity, without exception, restriction, or privilege of any sort. True, it is none too clear from this formula whether the rebel workers must feed the bourgeoisie that plays no part in the production and uses its ingenuity to oppose them. But, since that formula is opposed to the labor principle of the platform, we have to conclude that the toilers do have a duty to maintain the bourgeoisie, even if they have not the slightest desire to do so. We shall not enter into discussion of such a viewpoint. The working class itself will resolve it practically, come the social revolution. However, we do believe that it will not shower the authors of the reply with praise for the tender care with which they surrounded a bourgeois that refuses to work. Would the authors of the reply not be better advised to devise some way of turning bourgeois into honest members of laboring society instead of watching out for them with such solicitude? But the most impressive sleight of hand by the authors of the reply comes only later. After having seen them rebut all of the positions of the platform, after having seen them dismiss its authors as shameful Bolsheviks, and their constructive system as a transitional political and economic state system, one would expect to find them presenting a bold outline of the post-revolutionary anarchist society, of the society in which everybody would find their every need met and which would have nothing in common with the one sketched in the platform. Not a bit of it, though. All one finds there is an admission that the creative endeavor of the social revolution will be a natural start to the formation of an anarchist society. Now that declaration is borrowed, word for word, from the platform, which states the victory of the toilers will be the start of the construction of the anarchist society which, once outlined, will then, without interruption, follow its line of development, growing stronger and more rounded. In truth, with our adversaries, the right side of their minds has no idea what the left side is thinking and doing. 5. The problem of production. Nor do the authors of the reply fail to raise categorical objections to us in relation to the problem of production as well. It is very hard to get an idea of what prompts their objections, as well as what they are advocating in their exposition. The idea of unified and coordinated production set out by the platform leaves them cold, as does the idea of agencies directing production and elected by the workers. In the idea of coordinated production they divine the specter of centralization and statism, and they offer instead the idea of decentralized production. The idea of unified production is clear. The platform looks upon the whole of modern history as one single, giant workshop of producers, created by the efforts of several generations of toilers and altogether the property of everybody and no one in particular. Particular branches of production are inseparably interconnected and they can neither produce nor exist as separate entities. The unity of that workshop is determined by technical factors. But there is only one unified and coordinated production capable of existence in this mammoth factory. Production carried out in accordance with an overall scheme prescribed by the workers' and peasants' production organizations, a plan drafted in the light of the needs of society as a whole. The products of that factory belong to the whole of laboring society. Such production is truly socialist. It is very much to be regretted that the authors of the reply omitted to explain how they envisage decentralized production. But we may suppose that they are talking about several independent productions, isolated industries, separate trusts and maybe even separate factories producing and disposing of their products as they see fit. The authors of the reply declare that decentralized production will operate according to federalist principles. But, since the federated units will be nothing more than small private entrepreneurs, to wit, the united workforce of a single plant, trust, or industry, production will not be at all socialist, it will be capitalist, in that it is based on the parcelization of ownership, which will not take long to provoke competition and antagonisms. Unified production is not centralized production directed from authoritarian center. Unified production is merely authentically communist production. 6. Defense of the revolution. Examining the problem of the defense of the revolution, the platform remarks first the most effective means of defending the revolution would be to find a radical solution to the problems of production, supply, and the land. But the platform also foresaw that the solution to these problems will necessarily spark a bitter civil war in which the exploiter class will strive to retain or regain its privileges. That is quite inescapable. The platform indicates also that the class currently in power will in that war resort to the methodology of all military action, unity of operational planning and unity of overall command. It goes on to say that the toilers will also have to have recourse to these methods of struggle, and all the armed units that will spring up voluntarily will have to amalgamate into a single army. This necessity does not make it impossible for local detachments to wage an independent fight against the counter-revolution. It does, though, require that a revolutionary worker and peasant army confront the broad front of the counter-revolutionary onslaught. In order to combat the counter-revolution, the workers must possess their common operational plan and overall command. Otherwise, the enemy will attack them where they are weakest and least expecting it. History is the best proof of this. All popular revolutions were especially successful when the army ceased blindly to serve the ruling classes and threw in its lot with the rebels. During the Russian Revolution, it was those popular movements that managed to unite their armed forces, units of importance, to which military operations affecting an entire region were entrusted, that met with appreciable success. This was the case with the insurgent movement headed by Makhno. Insurgent groups that failed to understand this necessity perished in the face of a well-organized enemy. There were hundreds of instances of that in the Russian Revolution. The Russian counter-revolution led by Kolchak, Denikin, Yudenich, and others owes its military defeat chiefly to the fact that it failed to establish a single operational plan and united command for the counter-revolutionary armies. Thus while Kolchak was, in 1918, near Kazan and making for Moscow, Denikin stayed in the Caucasus, but it was only when Kolchak was liquidated, in 1919, that Denikin rounded on Moscow. Note, we are not speaking here of the partisan warfare waged by the partisans against Kolchak and Denikin and which brought the latter to military and social defeat. Insurgent revolutionary work during the Civil War must know how to use the methodology of unity of operational planning and overall command of the revolutionary armed forces. Without that, the workers and peasants will be beaten by counter-revolutionary forces highly conversant with the military arts. The platform pointed out how necessary it was that workers utilize that methodology as well as create a single army embracing all of the armed forces at the revolution's disposal. It goes without saying that the platform insists upon this organization only for the duration of the civil war in the fight against the counter-revolution. Once that war ends, the Revolutionary Army has no further raison d'être and will fade away. To tell the truth, the whole chapter in the platform that deals with defense of the revolution stressed only the need that workers will have to utilize the methodology of a common operational plan and common command. The platform also labors the point that these methods as well as the idea of the Revolutionary Army are to be regarded only as a stratagem necessitated by civil war and as no way as anarchist principles. It strikes us that no sane and honest mind could find grounds there of accusing the platform with pushing the idea of a standing, centralized army. But the authors of the reply manage it nonetheless. They charge us with nothing more nor less than aspiring to create a centralized army placed at the disposal of the overall productive organizations directed, in their turn, by the union/party. We believe that anarchist circles are clear-sighted enough to grasp for themselves that this view is absurd and incoherent. The reply proposes no hard and fast solution to the problem of defense of the revolution. After having proffered the most motley shower of insults against the platform, the authors of the reply start to mumble something about union of the armed forces in the revolution, thereby aping the idea of the platform, albeit misrepresenting it as usual. But it is by examining the necessity, announced by the platform, of the revolutionary armies being subordinated to the toilers' higher productive organizations that the authors of the reply display a true penetrating mind, a real masterpiece of farsightedness. How dare you, they exclaim, argue that is not a transitional period? Precisely how subordination of the revolutionary army to the workers' and peasants' productive organizations constitutes a transitional period that is the inscrutable enigma. The toilers' military forces will not in any way become an end in themselves, they will have only one way of implementing the formalities of the worker and peasant revolution. As a result, it is to the workers and peasants that the army should be answerable and by them alone that it should be directed politically. According to the authors of the reply, the Revolutionary Army, or indeed the armed groupings, should not be answerable to those organizations, they will lead an independent existence and fight as they deem fit. Thus are folk who have the effrontery to speak of things upon which they have never reflected hoist on their own petard. 7. Anarchist organization. On this score too, the authors of the reply are primarily concerned with misrepresenting the meaning of the platform. First of all, they turn the idea of an executive committee into that of a party central committee, a committee that issues orders, makes laws, and commands. Anybody in the least degree slightest conversant with politics knows well that an executive committee and a central committee are two quite different ideas. The executive committee may very well be an anarchist agency, indeed, such an organ exists in many anarchist and anarcho-syndicalist organizations. While rejecting the idea of a broad anarchist organization based on a homogeneous ideology, The authors of the reply peddle the idea of a synthesizing organization wherein all stands of anarchism are gathered together into one single family. To pave the way for the establishment of that organization, they propose to set up a newspaper in every country which would discuss and examine all controversial issues, from every angle, and thus bring about an entente between anarchists. We have already spelled out our position regarding this notion of synthesis, and we shall not rehearse our reasoning here. We shall confine ourselves simply to adding that the existence of discrepancies between the opinions of anarchists is due more to the lack of a periodical to act as a forum for discussion. There were some once. A forum for discussion will never manage to bring the divergent currents together, but it will assuredly clutter up the minds of the laboring masses. Furthermore, a whole swathe of individuals claiming to be anarchists has nothing in common with anarchism. Gathering these people, on the basis of what, into one family and describing that gathering as anarchist organization would not only be nonsense, it would be positively harmful. If that were to happen by some mischance, all prospects for anarchism's developing into a revolutionary social movement of toilers would be banished. It is not an undiscriminating mix, but rather a selection from the wholesome anarchist forces and the organization thereof into an anarchist communist party that is vital to the movement, not a hodgepodge synthesis, but differentiation and exploration of the anarchist ideas so as to bring them to a homogeneous movement program. That is the only way to rebuild and strengthen the movement in the laboring masses. To conclude, a few words on the ethical features of the reply. In reality, it is not to the platform that this reply is addressed, but to a whole series of positions duly misrepresented in advance by the authors of the reply. There is not a single paragraph to which they reply without preamble. They always start off ferreting out the Jesuitical recesses of the position and, after having concocted those, they put their objections to them. In their hands, the platform has been turned into a fiendish conspiracy against the anarchist movement and against the working class. This is how they represent the thinking of the platform: on top, the leading party, the General Union of Anarchists; down below, the higher peasant and worker organizations directed by the Union; lower still, the inferior organizations, the organs of struggle against the counter-revolution, the army, etc. Elsewhere, they talk about investigatory and political violence institutions. A whole picture is painted there, a portrait of a police state, directed by the General Union of Anarchists. One might well ask, why this recourse to all these lies? The authors of the reply have read the platform. So they ought to know that the thinking behind the platform boils down to the organization of the anarchist forces for the period of struggle against the capitalist class society. Its object is simply to spread anarchism among the masses and ideological direction of their struggle. The moment that the toilers have defeated the capitalist society, a new era in their history will be ushered in, an era when all social and political functions are transferred to the hands of the workers and peasants who will set about the creation of the new life. At that point, the anarchist organizations and, with them, the General Union, will lose all their significance, and they should, in our view, gradually melt away into the productive organizations of the workers and peasants. The platform contains a whole constructive section dealing with the role of the workers and peasants in the wake of the revolution. By contrast, it says nothing about the specific role at that juncture of the World Union of Anarchists. And this is no accident, but rather a deliberate omission. Because all political and economic activity will then be concentrated, as we see it, in the toilers' organs of self-administration, in the trade unions, the factory committees, the councils, etc. But, to credit the authors of the reply, it is only then that the anarchist Communist Party comes into its own, positioned somewhere up above. It is to direct the higher and lower toilers' organizations, the army, etc. That is their way of dealing with a document of which they propose to offer a critique, their way of treating the reader to whom they promised truth. The irresponsibility of these methods will surely startle any reader capable of reflection on matters political. In scrutinizing the other reasons for the anarchist movement's weakness, the authors of the reply point to this one: the current state of mind of the masses who have neither the wherewithal nor the desire to investigate, analyze, and make comparisons, and who, consequently, still and always plump for the easiest option, the course of the least resistance according to the ready-made recipes on offer from demagogues of every hue. Let us conclude our examination of the reply by these remarkable utterances from its authors. Remarkable words in that they demonstrate the futility and hypocrisy of their speechifying about the creative potential of the masses, their autonomous activity, the dire threat that ideological direction poses to that potential, etc. If the platform is to be believed, one gets the impression that the masses are not only incapable of finding the paths to their liberation, but also have not the slightest desire to do so, and prefer to follow the line of least resistance. If that is how things really stand, things are going badly for anarchism, since it is by force that it has to draw the masses to its side. In setting themselves the target of rebutting the platform, regardless of cost, even should they have to fly in the face of reason, the facts of life itself, in order to achieve that, the authors of the reply have been reduced to declarations like those. We hope that we have proved, in the foregoing exposition, that the program of the authors of the reply was quite without foundation and that they are typical specimens of the political incoherence in our movement. As for the ethical side of the reply, that cannot be described as anything other than an object lesson in calumny. Paris, August 18, 1927. The Two Octobers. Written, 1927. Source, text from revoltlib.com. Transcription/markup, Andy Karloff. Online source, revoltlib.com, 2021. The victorious revolution of the workers and peasants in 1917 was legally established in the Bolshevik calendar as the October Revolution. There is sane truth in this, but it is not entirely exact. In October 1917 the workers and peasants of Russia surmounted a colossal obstacle to the development of their revolution. They abolished the nominal power of the capitalist class, but even before that they achieved something of equal revolutionary importance and perhaps even more fundamental. By taking the economic power from the capitalist class, and the land from the large owners in the countryside, they achieved the right to free and uncontrolled work in the towns, if not the total control of the factories. Consequently, it was well before October that the revolutionary workers destroyed the base of capitalism. All that was left was the superstructure. If there had not been this general expropriation of the capitalists by the workers, the destruction of the bourgeois state machine, the political revolution, would not have succeeded in any way. The resistance of the owners would have been much stronger. On the other hand, the objectives of the social revolution in October were not limited to the overthrow of capitalist power. A long period of practical development in social self-management was before the workers, but it was to fail in the following years. Therefore, in considering the evolution of the Russian Socialist Revolution as a whole, October appears only as a stage, a powerful and decisive stage, it is true. That is why October does not by itself represent the whole social revolution. In thinking of the victorious October days, one must consider that historical circumstance as determined by the Russian social revolution. Another no less important peculiarity is that October has two meanings, that which the working masses who participated in the social revolution gave it, and with them the anarchist communists, and that which was given it by the political party that captured power from this aspiration to social revolution, and which betrayed and stifled all further development. An enormous gulf exists between these two interpretations of October. The October of the workers and peasants is the suppression of the power of the parasite classes in the name of equality and self-management. The Bolshevik October is the conquest of power by the party of the revolutionary intelligentsia, the installation of its state socialism and of its socialist methods of governing the masses. The Workers' October. The February Revolution caught the different revolutionary parties in complete disarray, and without any doubt they were considerably surprised by the profound social character of the dawning revolution. At first, no one except the anarchists wanted to believe it. The Bolshevik Party, which made out it always expressed the most radical aspirations of the working class, could not go beyond the limits of the bourgeois revolution in its aims. It was only at the April conference that they asked themselves what was really happening in Russia. Was it only the overthrow of Tsarism? Or was the revolution going further, as far as the overthrow of capitalism? This last eventually posed to the Bolsheviks the question of what tactics to employ. Lenin became conscious before the other Bolsheviks of the social character of the revolution, and emphasized the necessity of seizing power. He saw a decisive advance in the workers' and peasants' movement which was undermining the industrial and rural bourgeoisie foundations more and more. A unanimous agreement on these questions could not be reached even up to the October days. The party maneuvered all this time in between the social slogans of the masses and the conception of a social democratic revolution, from where they were created and developed. Not opposing the slogan of petty and grand bourgeoisie for a constituent assembly, the party did its best to control the masses, striving to keep up with their ever-increasing pace. During this time, the workers marched impetuously forward, relentlessly running their enemies of left and right into the ground. The big rural landowners began everywhere to evacuate the countryside, fleeing from the insurgent peasantry and seeking protection for their possessions and their persons in the towns. Meanwhile, the peasantry proceeded to a direct redistribution of land, and did not want to hear of peaceful coexistence with the landlords. In the towns as well, a sudden change took place between the workers and the owners of enterprises. Thanks to the efforts of the collective genius of the masses, workers' committees sprang up in every industry, intervening directly in production, putting aside the admonishments of the owners and concentrating on eliminating them from production. Thus in different parts of the country, the workers got down to the socialization of industry. Simultaneously, all of revolutionary Russia was covered with a vast network of workers' and peasant soviets, which began to function as organs of self-management. They developed, prolonged, and defended the revolution. Capitalist rule and order still existed nominally in the country, but a vast system of social and economic workers' self-management was being created alongside it. This regime of Soviets and factory committees, by the very fact of its appearance, menaced the state system with death. It must be made clear that the birth and development of the Soviets and factory committees had nothing to do with authoritarian principles. On the contrary, they were in the full sense of the term organs of social and economic self-management of the masses, and in no case the organs of state power. They were opposed to the state machine which sought to direct the masses, and they prepared for a decisive battle against it. The factories to the workers, the land to the peasants, these were the slogans by which the revolutionary masses of town and country participated in the defeat of the state machine of the possessing classes in the name of a new social system which was founded on the basic cells of the factory committees and the economic and social Soviets. These catchwords circulated from one end of workers' Russia to the other, deeply affecting the direct action against the socialist bourgeois coalition government. As was explained above, the workers and peasants had already worked towards the entire reconstruction of the industrial and agrarian system of Russia before October 1917. The agrarian question was virtually solved by the poor peasants as early as June, September 1917. The urban workers, for their part, put into operation organs of social and economic self-management, having seized from the state and the owners the organizational functions of production. The October Revolution of the workers overthrew the last and the greatest obstacle to their revolution, the state power of the owning classes, already defeated and disorganized. This last evolution opened a vast horizon for the achievement of the social revolution, putting it onto the creative road to socialist reconstruction of society, already pointed at by the workers in the preceding months. That is the October of the workers and the peasants. It meant a powerful attempt by the exploited manual workers to destroy totally the foundations of capitalist society, and to build a workers' society based on the principles of equality, independence, and self-management by the proletariat of the towns and the countryside. This October did not reach its natural conclusion. It was violently interrupted by the October of the Bolsheviks, who progressively extended their dictatorship throughout the country. The Bolshevik October. All the statist parties, including the Bolsheviks, limited the boundaries of the Russian Revolution to the installation of a social democratic regime. It was only when the workers and peasants of all Russia began to shake the agraro-bourgeois order, when the social revolution was proved to be an irreversible historical fact, that the Bolsheviks began discussing the social character of the revolution, and the consequent necessity of modifying its tactics. There was no unanimity in the party on questions of the character and orientation of the events which had taken place, even up to October. Furthermore, the October Revolution as well as the events which followed developed while the Central Committee of the party was divided into two tendencies. Whilst a part of the Central Committee, Lenin at its head, foresaw the inevitable social revolution and proposed preparation for the seizure of power, the other tendency, led by Zinoviev and Kamina, denounced as adventurous the attempt at social revolution, and went no further than calling for a constituent assembly in which the Bolsheviks occupied the seats furthest to the left. Lenin's point of view prevailed, and the party began to mobilize its forces in case of a decisive struggle by the masses against the provisional government. The party threw itself into infiltrating the factory committees and the Soviets of Workers' Deputies, doing its best to obtain in these organs of self-management the most mandates possible in order to control their actions. Nevertheless, the Bolshevik conception of, and approach to, the Soviets and the factory committees was fundamentally different from that of the masses. While the mass of workers considered them to be the organs of social and economic self-management, the Bolshevik party looked on them as a means by which it was possible to snatch the power of the sinking bourgeoisie and afterwards to use this power to serve the interests of the party. Thus an enormous difference was revealed between the revolutionary masses and the Bolshevik party in their conceptions and perspectives of October. In the first case, it was the question of the defeat of power with the view of reinforcing and enlarging the already constituted organs of workers' and peasants' self-management. In the second case, it was the question of leaning on these organs in order to seize power and to subordinate all the revolutionary forces to the party. This divergence played a fatal role in determining the future course of the Russian Revolution. The success of the Bolsheviks in the October Revolution, that is to say, the fact that they found themselves in power and from there subordinated the whole revolution to their party, is explained by their ability to substitute the ideas of a Soviet power for the social revolution and the social emancipation of the masses. A priori, these two ideas appear as non-contradictory, for it was possible to understand Soviet power as the power of the Soviets, and this facilitated the substitution of the idea of Soviet power for that of the revolution. Nevertheless, in their realization and consequences these ideas were in violent contraction to each other. The conception of Soviet power incarnated in the Bolshevik state, was transformed into an entirely traditional bourgeois power concentrated in a handful of individuals who subjected to their authority all that was fundamental and most powerful in the life of the people, in this particular case, the social revolution. Therefore, with the help of the power of the Soviets, in which the Bolsheviks monopolized most of the posts, they effectively attained a total power and could proclaim their dictatorship throughout the revolutionary territory. This furnished them with the possibility of strangling all the revolutionary currents of the workers in disagreement with their doctrine, of altering the whole course of the Russian Revolution and of making it adopt a multitude of measures contrary to its essence. One of these measures was the militarization of labor during the years of war. Communism, militarization of the workers so that millions of swindlers and parasites could live in peace, luxury, and idleness. Another measure was the war between town and country, provoked by the policy of the party in considering peasants as elements unreliable and foreign to the revolution. There was, finally, the strangling of libertarian thought and of the anarchist movement, whose social ideas and catchwords were the force of the Russian Revolution and orientated towards a social revolution. Other measures consisted of the proscription of the independent workers' movement, the smothering of the freedom of speech of workers in general. All was reduced to a single center, from where all instructions emanated concerning the way of life, of thought, of action of the working masses. That is the October of the Bolsheviks. In it was incarnated the ideal followed by decades by the revolutionary intelligentsia, initially realized now by the wholesale dictatorship of the All-Russian Communist Party. This ideal satisfies the ruling intelligentsia, despite the catastrophic consequences for the workers, now they can celebrate with pomp the anniversary of 10 years of power. The anarchists. Revolutionary anarchism was the only politico-social current to extol the idea of a social revolution by the workers and peasants, as much during the 1905 revolution as from the first days of the October Revolution. In fact, the role they could have played would have been colossal, and so could have been the means of struggle employed by the masses themselves. Likewise, no politico-social theory could have blended so harmoniously with the spirit and orientation of the revolution. The interventions of the anarchist orators in 1917 were listened to with a rare trust and attention by the workers. One could have said that the revolutionary potential of the workers and peasants, together with the ideological and tactical power of anarchism, could have represented a force to which nothing could be opposed. Unhappily, this fusion did not take place. Some isolated anarchists occasionally led intense revolutionary activity among the workers, but there was not an anarchist organization of great size to lead more continuous and coordinated actions, outside of the Nabat Confederation and the Makhnovshchina in the Ukraine. Only such an organization could have united the anarchists and the millions of workers. During such an important and advantageous revolutionary period, the anarchists limited themselves to the restricted activities of small groups instead of orientating themselves to mass political action. They preferred to drown themselves in the sea of their internal quarrels, not attempting to pose the problem of a common policy and tactic of anarchism. By this deficiency, they condemned themselves to inaction and sterility during the most important moments of the revolution. The causes of this catastrophic state of the anarchist movement resided in the dispersion, the disorganization, and the absence of a collective tactic, things which have nearly always been raised as principles among anarchists, preventing them making a single organizational step so that they could orientate the social revolution in a decisive fashion. There is no actual advantage in denouncing those who, by their demagogy, their thoughtlessness, and their irresponsibility, contributed to create this situation. But the tragic experience, which led the working masses to defeat, and anarchism to the edge of the abyss, should be assimilated as from now. We must combat and pitilessly stigmatize those who in one way or another, continue to perpetuate the chaos and confusion in anarchism, all those who obstruct its re-establishment or organization. In other words, those whose actions go against those efforts of the movement for the emancipation of labor and the realization of the anarchist communist society. The working masses appreciate and are instinctively attracted by anarchism, but will not work with the anarchist movement until they are convinced of its theoretical and organizational coherence. It is necessary for every one of us to try to the maximum to attain this coherence. Conclusions and perspectives. The Bolshevik practice of the last 10 years shows clearly the counter-revolutionary role of their dictatorship of the party. Every year it restrains a little more the social and political rights of the workers, and takes their revolutionary conquests away. There is no doubt that the historic mission of the Bolshevik Party is emptied of all meaning and that it will attempt to bring the Russian Revolution to its final objective, state capitalism of the enslaving salariat, that is to say, of the reinforced power of the exploiters and at the increasing misery of the exploited. In speaking of the Bolshevik Party as part of the socialist intelligentsia, exercising its power over the working masses of town and country, we have in view its central directing nucleus which, by its origins, its formation, and its lifestyle has nothing in common with the working class, and despite that, rules all the details of life of the party and of the people. That nucleus will attempt to stay above the proletariat, who have nothing to expect from it. The possibilities for rank and file party militants, including the communist youth, appear different. This mass has passively participated in the negative and counter-revolutionary policies of the party, but having come from the working class, it is capable of becoming aware of the authentic October of the workers and peasants and of coming towards it. We do not doubt that from this mass will come many fighters for the workers' October. Let us hope that they rapidly assimilate the anarchist character of this October, and that they come to its aid. On our side, let us indicate this character as much as possible, and help the masses to reconquer and conserve the great revolutionary achievements. Translated by Nick Heath IV. North London Organisation of Revolutionary Anarchists. For Libertarian Communist Review. Number 1 Winter 1976. The Old and New in Anarchism. Written, 1928. Source, text from revoltlib.com. Transcription/markup, Andy Karloff. Online source, revoltlib.com, 2021. A reply to Comrade Malatesta. Translator's introduction. Malatesta wrote a reply to the organizational platform of the Libertarian Communists whilst under house arrest in fascist Italy. It appeared in the Swiss anarchist paper Le Réveil and then as a pamphlet in Paris. One of the authors of the platform, Pyotr Arshinov, replied to Malatesta's criticisms in the paper set up by him and Nestor Makhno in Paris, Dialo Trauta. Equally, Makhno sent a long letter to Malatesta, stating that a misunderstanding of the text by Malatesta must have led to their disagreement. Malatesta did not get this letter for over a year, and replied as soon as he could. He still expressed disagreement with the platform, opposing moral responsibility to collective responsibility, and criticizing the executive committee mentioned in the platform as a government in good and due form. Makhno replied a second time. See my translation of excerpts of this letter in Correspondence in Freedom November 18, 1995. Malatesta appears to have conceded that it was a question of words, because if it collective responsibility meant the accord and solidarity which must exist between the members of an association, we will be close to understanding each other. Isolation due to house arrest and a problem of language may have contributed to these disagreements between Malatesta and the platformists. Arshinov's reply to Malatesta, which I have translated from the French, is its first appearance in the English language. I have taken the liberty of translating masses ouvrières as working masses. In the past this phrase has often been translated as toiling masses, which I feel to be somewhat passé. Whatever, Russian anarchists meant by this the industrial working class and the majority of the peasantry, which they felt must have unity of action and aims. Nick Heath. The Old and New in Anarchism. In the anarchist organ Le Réveil of Geneva, in the form of a leaflet, Comrade Errico Malatesta has published a critical article on the project of the organizational platform edited by the group of Russian anarchists abroad. This article has provoked perplexity and regret in us. We very much expected, and we still expect, that the idea of organized anarchism would meet an obstinate resistance among the partisans of chaos, so numerous in the anarchist milieu, because that idea obliges all anarchists who participate in the movement to be responsible and poses the notions of duty and constancy. For up to now the favorite principle in which most anarchists are educated can be explained by the following axiom: I do what I want, I take account of nothing. It is very natural that anarchists of this species, impregnated by such principles, are violently hostile to all ideas of organized anarchism and of collective responsibility. Comrade Malatesta is foreign to this principle, and it is for this reason that his text provokes this reaction in us. Perplexity, because he is a veteran of international anarchism, and if he has not grasped the spirit of the platform, its vital character and its topicality, which derives from the requirements of our revolutionary epoch. Regret, because, to be faithful to the dogma inherent in the cult of individuality, he has put himself against, let us hope this is only temporary, the work which appears as an indispensable stage in the extension and external development of the anarchist movement. Right at the start of his article, Malatesta says that he shares a number of theses of the platform or even backs them up by the ideas he expounds. He would agree in noting that the anarchists did not and do not have influence on social and political events, because of a lack of serious and active organization. The principles taken up by Comrade Malatesta correspond to the principal positions of the platform. One would have expected that he would have as equally examined, understood, and accepted a number of other principles developed in our project, because there is a link of coherence and logic between all the theses of the platform. However, Malatesta goes on to explain in a trenchant manner his difference of opinion with the platform. He asks whether the general union of anarchists projected by the platform can resolve the problem of the education of the working masses. He replies in the negative. He gives as reason the pretended authoritarian character of the union, which according to him, would develop the idea of submission to directors and leaders. On what basis can such a serious accusation repose? It is in the idea of collective responsibility, recommended by the platform, that he sees the principal reason for formulating such an accusation. He cannot admit the principle that the entire union would be responsible for every member, and that inversely each member would be responsible for the political line of all the union. This signifies that Malatesta does not precisely accept the principle of organization, which appears to us to be the most essential, in order that the anarchist movement can continue to develop. Nowhere up to here has the anarchist movement attained the stage of a popular organized movement as such. Not in the least does the cause of this reside in objective conditions, for example because the working masses do not understand anarchism or are not interested in it outside of revolutionary periods. No, the cause of the weakness of the anarchist movement resides essentially in the anarchists themselves. Not one time yet have they attempted to carry on in an organized manner either the propaganda of their ideas or their practical activity among the working masses. If that appears strange to Comrade Malatesta, we strongly affirm that the activity of the most active anarchists, which includes himself, assume, by necessity, an individualist character. Even if this activity is distinguished by a high personal responsibility, it concerns only an individual and not an organization. In the past, when our movement was just being born as a national or international movement, it could not be otherwise. The first stones of the mass anarchist movement had to be laid, an appeal had to be launched to the working masses to invite them to engage in the anarchist way of struggle. That was necessary, even if it was only the work of isolated individuals with limited means. These militants of anarchism fulfilled their mission, they attracted the most active workers towards anarchist ideas. However, that was only half of the job. At the moment where the number of anarchist elements coming from the working masses increased considerably, it became impossible to restrict oneself to carrying on an isolated propaganda and practice, individually or in scattered groups. To continue this would be like running on the spot. We have to go beyond so as not to be left behind. The general decadence of the anarchist movement is exactly explained thus: we have accomplished the first step without going further. This second step consisted and still consists in the grouping of anarchist elements, coming from the working masses, in an active collective capable of leading the organized struggle of the workers with the aim of realizing the anarchist ideas. The question for anarchists of all countries is the following: can our movement content itself with subsisting on the base of old forms of organization, of local groups having no organic link between them, and each acting on their side according to its particular ideology and particular practice? Or, just fancy, must our movement have recourse to new forms of organization which will help it develop and root it among the broad masses of workers? The experience of the last 20 years, and more particularly that of the two Russian revolutions -1905 and 1917-19, suggests to us the reply to this question better than all the theoretical considerations. During the Russian Revolution, the working masses were won to anarchist ideas. Nevertheless, anarchism, as an organized movement, suffered a complete setback whilst from the beginning of the revolution, we were at the most advanced positions of struggle. From the beginning of the constructive phase we found ourselves irremediably apart from the said constructive phase, and consequently outside the masses. This was not pure chance. Such an attitude inevitably flowed from our own impotence, as much from an organizational point of view as from our ideological confusion. This setback was caused by the fact that, throughout the revolution, the anarchists did not know how to put over their social and political program and only approached the masses with a fragmented and contradictory propaganda. We had no stable organization. Our movement was represented by organizations of encounter, springing up here, springing up there, not seeking what they wanted in a firm fashion, and which most often vanished at the end of a little time without leaving a trace. It would be desperately naive and stupid to believe that workers could support and participate in such organizations, from the moment of the social struggle and communist construction. We have taken the habit of attributing the defeat of the anarchist movement of 1917-19 in Russia to the statist repression of the Bolshevik Party. This is a big mistake. The Bolshevik repression impeded the extension of the anarchist movement during the revolution, but it wasn't the only obstacle. It's rather the internal impotence of the movement itself which was one of the principal causes of this defeat, an impotence proceeding from the vagueness and indecision which characterized different political affirmations concerning organization and tactics. Anarchism had no firm and concrete opinion on the essential problems of the social revolution, an opinion indispensable to satisfy the seeking after of the masses who created the revolution. The anarchists praised the communist principle of, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs, but they never concerned themselves with applying this principle to reality, although they allowed certain suspect elements to transform this great principle into a caricature of anarchism. Just remember how many con men benefited by seizing for their personal profit the assets of the collectivity. The anarchists talked a lot about revolutionary activity of the workers, but they could not help them, even in indicating approximately the forms that this activity should take. They did not know how to sort out the reciprocal relations between the masses and their center of ideological inspiration. They pushed the workers to shake off the yoke of authority, but they did not indicate the means of consolidating and defending the conquests of the revolution. They lacked clear and precise conceptions of a program of action on many other problems. It was this that distanced them from the activity of the masses and condemned them to social and historical impotence. It is in this that we must seek the primordial cause of their defeat in the Russian Revolution. And we do not doubt that, if the revolution broke out in several European countries, anarchists would suffer the same defeat, because they are no less, if not even more so, divided on the plan of ideas and organization. The present epoch, when, by millions, workers engaged on the battlefield of social struggle, demanded direct and precise responses from the anarchists concerning this struggle and the communist construction which must follow it, it demanded of the same, the collective responsibility of the anarchists regarding these responses and anarchist propaganda in general. If they did not assume this responsibility, the anarchists, like anyone else in this case, do not have the right to propagandize in an inconsequent manner among the working masses, who struggled in agreeing to heavy sacrifices and lost numberless victims. At this level, it is not a question of a game or the object of an experiment. That is how, if we do not have a general union of anarchists, we cannot furnish common responses on all those vital questions. At the start of his article, Comrade Malatesta appears to salute the idea of the creation of a vast anarchist organization. However, in categorically repudiating collective responsibility, he renders impossible the realization of such an organization. For that will not only not be possible if there exists no theoretical and organizational agreement, constituting a common platform where numerous militants can meet. In the measure to which they accept this platform, that must be obligatory for all. Those who do not recognize these basic principles, cannot become, and besides would themselves not want to become, a member of the organization. In this fashion, this organization will be the union of those who will have a common conception of a theoretical, tactical, and political line to be realized. Consequently, the practical activity of a member of the organization will be naturally in full harmony with the general activity, and inversely the activity of all the organization will not know how to be in contradiction with the conscience and activity of each of its members, if they accept the program on which the organization is founded. It is this that characterizes collective responsibility. The entire union is responsible for the activity of each member, knowing that they will accomplish their political and revolutionary work in the political spirit of the union. At the same time, each member is fully responsible for the entire union, seeing that his activity will not be contrary to that elaborated by all its members. This does not signify in the least any authoritarianism, as Comrade Malatesta wrongly affirms. It is the expression of a conscientious and responsible understanding of militant work. It is obvious that in calling on anarchists to organize on the basis of a definite program, we are not taking away as such the right of anarchists of other tendencies to organize as they think fit. However, we are persuaded that, From the moment that anarchists create an important organization, the hollowness and vanity of the traditional organizations will be revealed. The principle of responsibility is understood by Comrade Malatesta in the sense of a moral responsibility of individuals and of groups. This is why he only grants to conferences and their resolutions the role of a sort of conversation between friends, which in some pronounce only Platonic wishes. This traditional manner of representing the role of conferences does not stand up to the test of life. In effect, what would be the value of a conference if it only had opinions and did not charge itself with realizing them in life? None. In a vast movement, a uniquely moral and non-organizational responsibility loses all its value. Let us come to the question concerning majority and minority. We think that all discussion on this subject is superfluous. In practice, it has been resolved a long time ago. Always and everywhere among us, practical problems have been resolved by a majority of votes. It is completely understandable, because there is no other way of resolving these problems inside an organization that wants to act. In all the objections raised against the platform, there is lacking up to the moment the understanding of the most important thesis that it contains, the understanding of our approach to the organizational problem and to the method of its resolution. In effect, an understanding of these is extremely important and possesses a decisive significance with the idea of a precise appreciation of the platform and all the organizational activity of the Dielo-Trauta group. The only way to move away from chaos and revive the anarchist movement is a theoretical and organizational clarification of our milieu, leading to a differentiation and to the selection of an active core of militants, on the basis of a homogeneous theoretical and practical program. It is in this that resides one of the principal objectives of our text. What does our clarification represent and what must it lead to? The absence of a homogeneous general program has always been a very noticeable failing in the anarchist movement, and has contributed to making it very often very vulnerable, its propaganda not ever having been coherent and consistent in relation to the ideas professed and the practical principles defended. Very much to the contrary, it often happens that what is propagated by one group is elsewhere denigrated by another group. And that not solely in tactical applications, but also in fundamental theses. Certain people defend such a state of play in saying that in such a way is explained the variety of anarchist ideas. Well, let us admit it, but what interest can this variety represent to the workers? They struggle and suffer today and now and immediately need a precise conception of the revolution, which can lead them to their emancipation right away. They don't need an abstract conception, but a living conception, real, elaborated and responding to their demands. Whilst the anarchists often proposed, in practice, numerous contradictory ideas, systems, and programs, where the most important was neighbor to the insignificant, or just as much again, contradicted each other. In such conditions, it is easily understandable that anarchism cannot and will not ever in the future, impregnate the masses and be one with them, so as to inspire its emancipatory movement. For the masses sense the futility of contradictory notions and avoid them instinctively. In spite of this, in a revolutionary period, they act and live in a libertarian fashion. To conclude, Comrade Malatesta thinks that the success of the Bolsheviks in their country stops Russian anarchists who have edited the platform from getting a good night's sleep. The error of Malatesta is that he does not take account of the extremely important circumstances of which the organizational platform is the product, not solely of the Russian Revolution but equally of the anarchist movement in this revolution. Now, it is impossible not to take account of this circumstance so that one can resolve the problem of anarchist organization, of its form and its theoretical basis. It is indispensable to look at the place occupied by anarchism in the great social upheaval in 1917. What was the attitude of the insurgent masses with regard to anarchism and the anarchists? What did they appreciate in them? Why, despite this, did anarchism receive a setback in this revolution? What lessons are to be drawn? All these questions, and many others still, must inevitably put themselves to those who tackle the questions raised by the platform. Comrade Malatesta has not done this. He has taken up the current problem of organization in dogmatic abstraction. It is pretty incomprehensible for us, who have got used to seeing in him, not an ideologue but a practitioner of real and active anarchism. He is content to examine in what measure this or that thesis of the platform is or is not in agreement with traditional points of view of anarchism, then he refutes them, in finding them opposed to those old conceptions. He cannot bring himself to thinking that this might be the opposite, that it is precisely these that could be erroneous, and that this has necessitated the appearance of the platform. It is thus that can be explained all the series of errors and contradictions raised above. Let us note in him a grave neglect. He does not deal at all with the theoretical basis, nor with the constructive section of the platform, but uniquely with the project of organization. Our text has not solely refuted the idea of the synthesis, as well as that of anarcho-syndicalism as inapplicable and bankrupt. It has also advanced the project of a grouping of active militants of anarchism on the basis of a more or less homogeneous program. Comrade Malatesta should have dwelt with precision on this method, however he has passed over it in silence, as well as the constructive section, although his conclusions apparently apply to the entirety of the platform. This gives his article a contradictory and unstable character. Libertarian communism cannot linger in the impasse of the past, it must go beyond it, in combating and surmounting its faults. The original aspect of the platform and of the Dialo-Trouta group consists precisely in that they are strangers to out-of-date dogmas, to ready-made ideas, and that, quite the contrary, they endeavor to carry on their activity starting from real and present facts. This approach constitutes the first attempt to fuse anarchism with real life and to create an anarchist activity on this basis. It is only thus that libertarian communism can tear itself free of a superannuated dogma and boost the living movement of the masses. Dialo-Trouta No. 30 May 1928 pages 4-11. Translated by Nick Heath, Anarchist Communist Federation. Elements Old and New in Anarchism, a reply to Maria Isidine. Written, 1928. Source, text from revoltlib.com. Transcription/markup, Andy Karloff. Online source, revoltlib.com, 2021. Comrade Isidine counters our conception of a revolutionary anarchist organization with the old conception corresponding to an age when anarchists had no real organization, but, by means of mutual understanding, came to agreement upon goals and the means of achieving them. In fact, the old party was confined to analogous ideas and was bereft of authentic organizational format. It corresponded above all to the birth of the anarchist movement, when its pioneers were groping their way forward, not having been tempered by the harsh experience of life. Socialism too, in its day, had a difficult gestation. However, as the masses' social struggle evolved and became acute, all the tendencies that were vying to influence the outcome took on more precise political and organizational forms. Those tendencies which failed to keep in step with this evolution lagged far behind life. We Russian anarchists were especially sensible of this during the two revolutions of 1905 and 1917. Whereas, at their outset, we were in the forefront of the fighting, as soon as the constructive phase began, we found ourselves sidelined beyond recovery and, ultimately, remote from the masses. This was not the result of chance. Such an attitude flowed inescapably from our impotence, from the organizational point of view as well as from the vantage point of our ideological confusion. The current, of this decisive age, requires of us something more than a party devoid of organizational format and erected solely upon the notion of a beautiful idea. These times require that the anarchist movement, as a whole, supply answers to a whole host of issues of the utmost importance, whether relating to the social struggle or to communist construction. They require that we feel a responsibility towards our objectives. However, until such time as we have a real and significant organization, it is not going to be possible for us to supply those answers, nor to shoulder those responsibilities. Indeed, the consistently distinctive feature of our movement is that it does not have a unity of views on these fundamental issues. There are as many views as there are persons and groups. Certain anarchists regard this situation as reflective of the multifariousness of anarchist thinking. Struggling labor has no idea what to make of this mixed bag, which strikes it as absurd. So, in order to rise above the morass of absurdity in which the anarchist movement has got bogged down, by loitering in the first stage of organization despite its numerical expansion, it is vital that a strenuous and decisive effort should be made. It must adopt the organizational formats for which it has long since been ripe, otherwise, it will lose its ability to hold its natural place in the fight for a new world. The urgent necessity of this new step is acknowledged by many comrades, the ones for whom the fate of libertarian communism is bound up with the fate of struggling labor. Comrade Isidine, if we understand her right, is not to be numbered among the anarchists of whom we spoke earlier, but she is not a participant in our movement either. She takes part only in debate, in a critical way, and, to be sure, she helps its progress in doing so. Let us now tackle the various critical points indicated by Comrade Isidine. Everybody knows that any wholesome principle can, once denatured, serve a cause contrary to the one to which it was originally assigned. In our ranks, this holds true for federalism. Sheltering behind that cover, lots of groups and certain individuals perpetuated acts, the results of which fell on the movement as a whole. All intervention in such cases came to nothing, because the perpetrators of these acts of infamy sought refuge in their autonomy, invoking the federalism that allowed them to do as they saw fit. Obviously, that was merely a crass misrepresentation of federalism. The same might be said of other principles, and especially, of the principle of organizing a general union of anarchists, should it fall into the clutches of witless or unscrupulous persons. Comrade Isidine disagrees profoundly with the principle of majority. We, on the other hand, reckon that on this point debate is scarcely necessary. In practice, this matter has long been resolved. Almost always and almost everywhere, our movement's practical problems are resolved by majority vote. At the same time, the minority can cling to its own views, but does not obstruct the decision. Generally, and of its own volition, it makes concessions. This is perfectly understandable, as there cannot be any other way of resolving problems for organizations that engage in practical activity. There is, anyway, no alternative if one really wants to act. In the event of differences of opinion between the majority and the minority being due to factors so important that neither side can give ground, a split comes about, regardless of the principles and positions espoused by the organization prior to that moment. Nor do we agree with Comrade Isidine when she says that the mouthpiece of an isolated group can work out a policy line of its own, and that, in this way, according to her, the organ of the General Union of Anarchists should mirror all of the views and tendencies existing inside the Union. In fact, the mouthpiece of a particular group is not the concern merely of its editorial team, but also of all who lend it material and ideological backing. Since, in spite of this, a well-determined policy line is needed by that, say, local organ, it is all the more essential for the mouthpiece of the Union, which carries a lot more responsibilities with regard to the anarchist movement as a whole than that particular organ. To be sure, the Union mouthpiece must afford the minority a platform for its views, for otherwise the latter would be denied its right of free expression. However, while allowing it to set out its point of view, the Union mouthpiece must simultaneously have its own well-defined policy line and not just mirror the motley views and states of mind arising within the Union. In order to illustrate the example of a decision made by the Union as a body, but not enjoying unanimous backing, Comrade Isidine cites the Makhnovist movement, anarchists having been divided in their attitudes towards it. That example, though, rather underlines the argument in favor of the ongoing necessity of a libertarian communist organization. The differing views expressed then are explicable primarily in terms of many libertarians' utter ignorance of that movement during its development. Many of them were later powerless to analyze it and adopt a policy line with regard to a movement as huge and original as the Makhnovists. They needed a solid organization. Had they had one at the time, it would have considered itself obliged to scrutinize that movement minutely and then, on the basis of that scrutiny, it would have laid down the stance of to be adopted with regard to it, which would have served libertarian communism and the Makhnovist movement better than the chaotic, disorganized stance adopted by the anarchists with regard to the latter during its lifetime. The same goes for the problem of war. It comes to pass that differences arise in organizations over such matters, and in such cases splits are frequently the outcome. However, there is the argument for taking it as a rule that in such situations, the point of departure should be, not the individual conscience and tactics of every single anarchist, but rather the essential import of the theory, policy, and tactics of the Union as a body. Only thus will the movement be able to preserve its policy line and its liaison with the masses. Organization and the principle of delegation are not such impediments to the display of initiative as Comrade Isidine believes. Quite the contrary. All wholesome initiative will always enjoy the backing of organization. The principles spelled out are not designed to stifle initiative, but to replace the fitful activity of individuals operating randomly and occasionally with the consistent and organized work of a collective body. It could not be otherwise. A movement that survived only thanks to the initiative and creativity of various groups and individuals, and which had no specific overall activity would run out of steam and go into decline. For that very reason, one of the fundamental tasks of our movement consists of contriving the circumstances that allow every militant not merely to demonstrate initiative, but to seize upon and develop it, making it an asset to the entire movement. Thus far, and for want of an overall organization, our movement has not had such circumstances, thanks to which every authentic militant might find an outlet for their energies. It is common knowledge that certain of the movement's militants have given up the fight and thrown in their lot with the Bolsheviks, simply because they were not able to find an outlet for their efforts in the anarchist ranks. Moreover, it is beyond the question that many revolutionary workers, who find themselves in the ranks of the Communist Party of the USSR, have no illusions left regarding Bolshevik rule and might switch their allegiances to anarchism, but do not do so because there is no overall organization offering precise guidance. Comrade Isidine stresses one of the merits of the platform, in that it has broached the principle of collective responsibility in the movement. However, she thinks of this principle solely in terms of the moral responsibility. Whereas, in a large, organized movement, responsibility can only find expression in the form of an organization's collective responsibility. A moral responsibility that does not accommodate organizational responsibility is bereft of all value in collective endeavors, and turns into a mere formality devoid of all content. What we need, Comrade Isidine tells us, is not so much an organization as a definite practical policy line and a hard and fast immediate program. But each of those is unthinkable in the absence of prior organization. If only to raise issues of the program and its implementation, there would have to be an organization in place that might undertake to struggle towards their resolution. At present, the Delotruda group of Russian anarchists abroad has given that undertaking, and enjoys the support in this of several anarchist toilers organizations in North America, and by comrades remaining in Russia. In the pioneering work carried out by these organizations, there may well be certain errors and gaps. These must be pointed out and help given in the repairing of them, but there must be no lingering doubt as to the basis and principle upon which these organizations operate and struggle, the drafting of a definite program, a well-determined policy and tactical line for libertarian communism, creation of an organization representing and spearheading the whole anarchist movement. This is vitally necessary to it.